Pinch pot. So we're going to need clay, and what we're going to do is we're going to make some handmade little pots. Let me just show you where some of the things are that you're going to need, okay? So if you come back here, I've got a bunch of cans, and in these cans are a bunch of tools that you're going to need, okay? So in the cans are, for example, this is just nothing but knives. They're like butter knives. And then right here we have what's called loop tools. Loop tools are this tool that's got a little wire loop. That's for scooping or digging clay out. We won't need those right now, but eventually we will. A toothbrush. It's not for brushing your teeth. Well, at one time it was, but we're going to need a toothbrush, okay? This is a little, I can't remember what you call this, but a little tool that's got a little pointy, little spoon-like points on either side. It's good for carving and cutting clay, okay? Then we have something called wood modeling tools. Wood modeling tools are these tools that are made of smooth wood. They're for smoothing and forming clay, and you will be using one of those. They come in different shapes and sizes depending on what you're doing, okay? So some people have favorite toys. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab some of these here, and I'm gonna take them to my work area, okay? Then, what you're gonna need is some water. Let me show you where that water is. So if you come back here, in this drawer that's right next to sink 2 here is a drawer full of old baby food jars. And all you got to do is grab one of those and just put a little bit of water in the bottom. You don't need hardly any. I only put an inch. I don't even need that much. A half inch would be fine. So I just need a little bit of water, and then we're going to start working here. So you guys could look up at the demonstration screen there, and I'm going to try to get this set up so that persons at home can see what we're doing. Okay, so couple things. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be making what's called a pinch pot, and it's a real basic project. Matter of fact, you can teach them to kindergartners, although they don't do a very good job, but it can be done. And what they are is little bowls like this that they're handmade, and this one had a little handle put on. Here's one with a handle, and then the person formed this little spout here, a little scoop. And then on the bottom, you can see it has a little ring of clay, so it has what's called a foot, something that it'll sit on, okay? Here's a pretty plain one, but they added some indentations and decorations on the inside and the outside, okay? And then here's a real basic one. It's got another little ladle on here. This one's pretty boring. This was just a sample that I made. I don't want you to make something this boring and plain, okay? And here's one that a student did last semester and never was able to be fired. Now this is clay that's completely dry, okay? It's called bone dry. When clay's like this, it's really fragile. So be super careful with it when it's bone dry. If I would set this down even just too roughly on the table, there's a good chance it could crack or that handle could break off, okay? So let me show you how to get started. So first of all, you're gonna have a big thing of clay, and I'm gonna keep it at the front table, and here's my big chunk of clay right here, okay? This clay comes in a bag, and the bag is always kept really, really, really tight, okay, with no air in it. If there's no air in here, it won't dry up. But if you store it in the bag and you leave a big balloon of air inside here, okay, then that air is gonna dry that clay out. So you wanna make sure this is stored properly. So after you take clay, you always wanna wrap it up really tight. Okay, next thing, to cut the clay. I've got it's a fishing line. It's pretty simple. It's just a piece of little wire. You can see that right there. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna cut a chunk of this clay off with that wire. So I'm gonna go like this and take a chunk of clay off, and there we go. And there's my chunk of clay, okay? I think I need, that's pretty good. I'll take just a little more off and add it to that. So just take the wire or the fishing line, I'll take a piece off like that, and I'll add it to this. So I just added the clay to that, okay? I'm gonna get this clay out of the way, move it to another table. This will be kept at the front table near the kiln, that front corner table, table number 1, or underneath that blue table up there, okay? Now, this is how we're gonna start. First of all, we're gonna take this clay and we're gonna pound it into a ball. You say pound it into a ball, you're gonna take your hands and start packing it into a ball, okay? Now, I'm gonna start patting it down. Now, what happens though, is when you start doing this, your hands start getting really dry. Your hands kind of work like sponges, and your hands get, see my hands are getting all dirty like this? My hands start soaking up all the clay, okay? So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna try to make this into a ball. And the better the ball to start, the better chance you'll have this working out. Now, this is what the water's for. Occasionally, you're gonna wet your hands. I don't mean soak your hands, you're just gonna dampen them. So I'm gonna put a little water on my hands like this, not a lot. You can see my hands are just a little wet, and I'm just gonna make my hands damp, like that. And then I'm gonna use that to make this clay nice and round, okay? Now this is called a pinch spot, and it's because we're gonna be pinching the clay. Now if you see any cracks form, like you see there's a little crack here, you just take your finger and kind of cover up that crack, okay? So we wanna get rid of the cracks, because crack is bad, okay? Has a little humor. You can laugh or say something. Okay. All right, maybe it was bad humor. Okay, here we go. So what I'm gonna do now is this. I'm gonna start making my bowl. So I'm gonna start working my thumb down into the center of this, and I'm gonna put my thumb and then rotate the bowl just a little bit. So I just keep working my thumb down in here and rotating the bowl a little bit. Okay? So keep working it in. Now don't just be like Hercules and shove your finger all the way to the bottom. You gotta do it gently. So I'm pushing my thumb in and then rotating the bowl about a half a thumb until eventually I'm gonna get down near the bottom of this, okay? And you can't really tell how far you are. You're like, I don't know how far I am, but you can kind of feel here, okay? And I can tell it's still pretty thick. Now you want the clay to be about the thickness of your finger, about that thick, okay? So what I'm gonna do is push this down until I'm about that thickness from the bottom, okay? Now, what's gonna happen here, I keep rotating it a little at a time in the palm of my hand and pushing my thumb into the side here, okay? Now what happens is this, if I was to cut this in half right now, I would probably have a bowl that looks kind of like this. It's really deep on the bottom, but the sides are super thick, okay? So what I'm gonna do is, eventually I want it to look a little bit more like this. So what do? I come in here and I pinch right in this area and right in this area, okay? And when I pinch in that area, it forces the clay upward. Got that? So what I'm doing is I'm pinching and turning. So I keep pinching and turning. And I'm pinching, but I'm really using my bottom hand right now to push against my top hand. And I'm gonna keep rotating this so that the clay keeps getting a little higher and higher. Okay? So here we go, I keep rotating it. Now, my clay looks a little bit more like this here. So it's pretty thin here, but it's still pretty thick on the top. So I have to keep pinching that, because eventually what I want is something like this, okay? So it's the same thickness on the bottom, worked all the way to the top. Now, I'm feeling this, and I can feel it with my fingers, and I can see it too. I can see right now if I look at this, this is pretty thin and this is really thick here. So I'm going to keep pinching that and working it a little bit, just a little at a time, and keep working it around until eventually you're gonna get a bowl shape. Now you might say, well, you can have a bowl shape that's really tall, like this bowl shape is more tall, and then here's one that's a little bit more shallow. So if it's more shallow, you're gonna push outward and not up so much on the outside. So I'll push more here and not so much here. Okay, but if I want it to go up, I'm gonna push more on the outside, and that'll bring it up. Now, I can feel this, I can see it, but I can also feel it, and I can see the areas that are a little thicker, and I can also feel the areas that are a little thicker. Now, if the clay starts to get dry and cracked, okay, then what you need to do is you need to just get your finger a little bit wet, and then just rub it over that area that's dry or cracked, and then take a dry finger and kind of get rid of those little cracks, okay? Because it will make a difference. If you've got cracks in your project, eventually when your bowl starts to dry, air gets in those cracks, and then it'll separate that part of the clay a little bit more. Now clay, as clay dries, it actually shrinks a little bit. It's kind of like a sponge. You ever see a hard sponge if you got it under your sink? The sponge is really small. And then as soon as you start adding water, the sponge gets bigger, okay? Well, the same thing happens with clay. Clay is made up of little particles, kind of like sand, and there's water between them, That's what makes them move around like this. Just like when you make a sandcastle, you know, when you put water in your sand is really sturdy, right? And then as the sand, the sand starts to dry, your sand starts to get more brittle and it falls apart. Well, the same thing happens with clay, but also as your water dries in your clay actually shrinks. So a bowl that's this big, it won't look much different, but it'll actually shrink a little bit. So if I've got two pieces of clay like this that are stuck together, and there's a crack in between them, what'll happen is if they start drying, that crack will start opening up. Okay, so the crack will go like this and it'll start to open up because both these pieces are drying and they're getting smaller. Okay, so there's my basic bowl right now. And you can see it's not too bad. It didn't take me too long to do. And it's a little bumpy, but it's a handmade bowl. So it's not going to look smooth like some bowl you'd buy in the store. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit bumpy. Now what I'm going to do now is this. I'm going to show you how to add other things to that bowl. So there's my bowl. Okay, and I'm going to add some other features to that bowl. So I'm going to go back and get my fishing line, and I'm going to get a little more clay. And let me just grab some clay out of here. You can't see what I'm doing, but just imagine I'm trying clay. Okay, so here's a little bit of clay, probably more than I need, but for demonstration purposes, it'll be just fine. So what I'm going to do now is this. Let's say I wanted to make a little handle like this, okay? Or I wanted to make this little roll here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this bowl. Oh, by the way, notice I got newspaper down. You have to put newspaper on your table because if you don't, your table's going to be super messy and you're going to have to scrub it later. So you're going to save yourself a lot of time if you put newspaper down because you just fold the newspaper and throw it out, okay? So I'm going to take some clay right now, just take a piece off of here, and I'm going to roll this in my hands. You've probably done this with Play-Doh and stuff where you kind of roll it around. Now here, I've got this thing, looks like a little clay cigar or whatever, and I'm taking my hand on it, I'm keeping it a little bit moist, so a little bit of water again, a little more, just a couple fingers, put it on your hand, make your hands a little shiny, a little moist. And then what I'm gonna do is just roll this out, like so, and I get this little sort of clay snake, I guess you'd call it. Okay, so I start on the thick area and I work my hands out to the thinner areas until I get this little snake here. Okay, now suppose I want to put a ridge on the bottom like this one so that the bowl doesn't tip so easy. It's got a little ring on the bottom. Okay, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to turn that into a circle like that, and then I'm going to be attaching that to the bottom of my bowl. Okay, so that's going to go right there. Okay, now I'm not just going to squish it in place because I do that, it's going to dry up and just fall off later. So there's some things that you need to do. And I'll show you the procedures for that. And it requires a toothbrush. It requires a fork. Oh, I forgot to grab a fork. Be right back. Okay. So I got a toothbrush. I got a fork. Okay. Now what I'm going to be doing here is this. I'm going to be attaching this ring to the bottom here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the ring. So I'm going to take any tool. You could take a pencil if you want. And I'm just going to put a little line on my clay just where that ring is meeting the bowl. So if I take that ring off, you can faintly see, but there's a little line right here. Okay? Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my toothbrush, my fork, and I'm going to poke a bunch of holes right inside where that clay is going to be touching. Now that's called scoring this. Okay, you guys heard of Velcro? You're like creating Velcro with your clay. I'm making the ends of the clay really rough and pointy like this with my fork. The reason I use a fork is I can poke four holes at once rather than just poking one hole. Then I'm going to take this and I'm going to score that. A lot of holes. You can't put too many holes, but if you don't put enough, it may fall apart. So there's my ring with the holes. There's holes on there. This is going to be attached on top of there. So now what I'm going to do is this is where my toothbrush comes in line. I'm going to take my toothbrush, get a little bit of water on it, and I'm going to jab water into those holes that I just made. Okay, it's going to soak into those holes and penetrate the clay. So I'm creating what's called slip. Slip is when you mix water with clay. You know, when you mix water with dirt, what do you get? You get mud. When you mix it with clay, you get slip, okay? So then I'm gonna poke this part. I'm putting water on here and letting that penetrate. Now the toothbrush does two things. It gets water into the holes, but at the same time, it roughs up the surface, sort of like making Velcro, okay? Now what I'm gonna do, so I rough this up, it's wet, and it's all shiny looking, and then the same thing is on the bowl. I'm gonna take this and push it on top of the bowl and push that down in place. That's where I'm gonna squish it. Now what happens, just like a suction cup, that water is gonna squish into there, and it's gonna really, so you can see the little water seeping out of here when I push this. I don't know if you can see it, but little water seeping out of there, okay? And now I need to seam it. And that's where your wood modeling tool comes in, okay? What I'm gonna do is just take the point of this thing, and I'm gonna go right along the edge, and I'm gonna push the clay into the crack. So I'm getting rid of a crack there. Matter of fact, where I attach it, there's a little bit of a crack, so I'm gonna go across there and smooth that in, right in there. And then I'm also gonna do the outside edge, right here. So with my wood modeling tool, I'm gonna get rid of the crack that was there. So when you're done with this, you shouldn't see a line there. It'll just smooth right into place. Now, this is my wood modeling tool, and it's got kind of a rounded edge. But you know what else works really good for cracks? It's just a pencil. If you got a pencil with a dull tip, that works really nice for going right in the edges here like this. So a pencil works actually really nice. Of course, you can get your pencil a little messy, but that's okay. So there, I've just added this little ring or foot to the bottom, okay? Now, what else can I add? Oop, I set that there. So there we go. There's my little bowl that I just made. Now, let's just say I want to put a handle on it, okay? So now there's a lot of things you can add to this, but let's say I wanted to put a handle on this. I'm going to take my clay. Now, this handle's pretty skinny, and just for demonstration purposes, it's probably a little skinnier than I'd normally put this on here. But what I'm going to do is form that into a handle like that. I'll take my knife, and I'll cut that off like that and like that. And then what I would do with my bowl is if I'm gonna put this on, let's say like this, okay, I would mark this and score the end of this and then push that in place. Now this handle is pretty small and tiny, and it's probably gonna fall off, okay? But I'm just showing you how you would do that. Next thing, imprinting ideas into your clay. I've got all kinds of things in my class here, and I'll get them out for you, but things as simple as, you know, if I wanted to put some kind of design on here, you know, I could imprint the edge of this fork, the fork handle in here, and create a pretty cool looking pattern going all the way around there. Or maybe I take a fork itself and I make these little indents like this that are going all the way around. Okay, now this is kind of sloppy, but I'm just giving you different ideas. Now, let me show you something kind of unusual. You can do right now, all I want you to do is make this pinch bowl-like shape, but it doesn't have to be a bowl. Okay, so for example, somebody made this one. What they did is they made a bowl-like shape, okay? And then what they did is they added these features like eyebrows and then the ears and stuff like that. They added those to the side, and basically they turned their bowl into this little monkey head, okay? So you don't have to make a bowl. You could make a sculpture, but you're gonna use the basic pinch pot to make that sculpture, okay? Now, last thing, finishing this up. Over here in my, in this cabinet, okay? If you come on over here, this is a cabinet where we're gonna store our projects, okay? And you can't see where you guys are at, but down here, there's a basket that's full of bags. Little bags like this, okay? Those bags I got from Piggly Wiggly. I asked them, they gave mine, and steal them. I also have, if you run out of those, I have a whole roll of bags here that Piggly Wiggly gave me, and you can grab a bag like that. Next thing you're gonna need is a board. A board is basically, it's a little piece of wood that you can put in the bottom of your basket. So there's your board, okay? So I need a board, I need a bag, and I need a basket. Now there's some baskets here, and since we shut down with the COVID thing early, they still have projects in them. So what you're gonna do is just carefully take these projects out, and we're gonna bring them to that front table over there, and I may be firing them. This one already has a board, so you can just take that. So you're gonna be storing your project in plastic on a board in a bag. Okay? So once again, when you go to store your stuff, if I take, I'm going to take my project, and what I'm going to do here is this. When I'm ready to store this, now it depends on what you're doing. If you want to store your project and you're like, well, I'm not done with it, I want to keep working on it. So if you want to keep working on it, you really don't want it to dry up at all, right? So this is what you're going to do if you don't want it to dry up. You're going to take paper towels back by the sink, you're going to get them wet, and then you're going to wring them out so there's no more water in them, okay? They're just damp. Then you're going to wrap your project in a damp paper towel, and then you're going to put it tightly inside of a bag with no air, okay? And then your clay will stay the same. But my clay right now is very flexible, a little too flexible. I want my clay to get a little stiffer, but I still want to be able to carve on it and add things to it, but I want it to get stiffer. So if that's the case, I'm not going to wrap it in paper towels, okay? What I'm going to do instead is just wrap it in plastic. So I put it inside the plastic bag, get as much air out of it as you can, set it on your board, okay? And then your board will go in your basket. And then on the front of your basket, you're going to put a little piece of scrap paper with your name on it so you know whose basket that is, okay? Then, if you notice on the side where I have that cabinet open, I don't know if you can notice, but there is a basket on each of these. And what you're going to do is, say you want to put your stuff in the top row, we're going to put a little post-it note, and you say, okay, that back left, top row, that's mine. That's my basket. Okay, that's where I'm going to keep my stuff. Got that? So I'll get some post-it notes out and just put your stuff, which shelf you keep right, any shelf you want. Other than this shelf, I have the bags, the boards, and the rollers. And I'll show you how to use the rollers later in class. Okay? Any questions at all? So we should be ready to start